Hey, gorgeous people. Happy Monday morning, August 25th. We have kind of a sexy little astrology week for you this week. It's sultry, it's fiery. We have Venus moving into Leo. She's going to immediately form up a trine to Saturn and Neptune in Aries and oppose Pluto. Now, some of the sexiest art in the world comes from these Venus Pluto contacts. So, we're going to take a look at some of that and talk through all of the transits. As always, I'm Alexandra Blair of Nine Lives Astrology, and this is First Light, my Monday morning chat show where we talk through art and archetypes and mythologies and stories you're already living, trying to get astrology back into something that feels lived in the bones, rather than just something we kind of understand in theory or keywords we are memorizing. Before we get into all of those transits, I want to call your attention to a couple special things going on in Blairtown over here. First things first, I want to let you guys know that I am manning the weekend news desk, so to speak, over at Nightlight Astrology. So every week on Saturday, myself, Whitney Kranz, Alex Amorosi, and Dana Solara are meeting there to talk about any and all things astrology. We have a couple videos out right now that are really fun. We did Madonna's natal chart for Leo season. We actually talked about our own personal ideas about ritual in eclipse season and how that works out. And this weekend, we did an episode that I kind of planned and hosted that was all about essential dignity in Virgo. So we talked about Mercury, Jupiter, and Venus, and some other planets, but primarily those three together in Virgo and what they mean and how they're happy or unhappy and how they express. I really love this video, and the conversation was super interesting. So head over to Nightlight Astrology. That video is linked in the description and check that out. I've also launched a mentorship program I'm super excited about with my dearest friend, Sarah Posh. Now, both of us have received extensive inquiries about mentorship opportunities. So we decided to do it together because everything's more fun together. And we are offering a really small group mentorship situation, a cohort, if you will, this fall. Now, we're going to meet for 8 weeks and we're going to dive deep into natal context and what that means. Now, if you're like, what is natal context? Know that a lot of you are already thinking natal context every time you comment on one of my videos and you're like, hey, this transit that was supposed to be amazing was tough for me, or this transit that was supposed to be really hard actually brought something awesome into my life. That's what we're getting at. Not every natal chart is the same, and not every transit affects us all the same. So expect more videos about this on my channel. But if you really want to have some of that one on one time, Sarah and I are offering this 8 week container. And it includes a private session with each of us after the container ends. It's going to be really hands on, really collaborative, and a small group full of other astro weirdos. So come study with me and let's find out what your natal chart has to say about you. And the link to that mentorship is also in the description. All right, let's take a look at some of my favorite comments from last week. Dream Girl Rising is doing an advertisement for my mentorship when she says, that Venus Jupiter conjunction was not as lovely as I thought it would be. I decided to do laundry because with that conjunction, I wanted a day at home, chill, productive. Well, the washer had a malfunction, and as I was folding clothes in my bedroom, waiting for that second load to finish, I realized the whole house was flooded with water. And I'm saying this because sometimes the transits that are good end up being weird, and the bad transits end up being empowering. At least that's what I'm hoping for as a Virgo rising. No Virgo placements other than the ascendant, though. Yeah, that's definitely it, especially with Jupiter and Venus, especially with Mars and Saturn, because those planets are designated as good planets or bad planets. But a lot really depends on your natal relationship with those planets. You kind of can't just take that at face value. So it's really hard on a week like last week, where all signs are pointing to beauty and kindness and softness and goodness, but we all have different relationships with these planets in our natal chart. So you learn something really important about your natal context today, Dream Girl Rising. I wish it had been under more pleasant circumstances, but in my video about the Venus Jupiter conjunction, I think we went a little bit into some of the shadow side that Venus and Jupiter can bring up. Flooding your house full of water, not necessarily something I would have expected, but maybe important information for you to carry into future transits. All right, Chris Stewart 7872 commented on my video about Virgos and Virgos bracing themselves and says, Virgo rising here, Aries sun, Aquarius moon. As you were talking, my mind immediately jumped straight to panic, thinking what part of me is wrong or needs to be changed. And I felt a sense of dread. And then you immediately spoke about your Virgo BFFs not giving themselves the same level of care and love they give to others. And I cried in a good way. Thank you for this. I now know what I need to do. I'm sending you love, Virgo BFF. My Virgo girlies are hard on themselves. They are hard on themselves. So take this as your sign, elevate the level of care you're giving to yourself to at least be what you are giving to other people. And Virgos, give yourself a little hug and kiss for me. Okay, Erica Jasmine says, your videos are poetry. Every time I listen to you, I'm inspired to expand my vocabulary and spend more time with my imagination. And that just makes me so happy I had to include it. It seriously brings so much joy to my heart to make these videos. I really enjoy delving into my own imagination and really using my Mercurial, Neptunian conduit muscles to try to bring in connections for you guys. So hearing that they land, that they resonate, that you guys are liking what I'm doing, it really means a lot to me. I read every single comment that you leave me. And if you guys ever have tie-ins of your own that you think, wow, this show reminded me of, or if you want to share your art or the things that you create with me on Instagram DMs, I would love that. Okay, last things last. DZRMGKVA says, ever since that joke in the comments about you being AI, I'm kind of freaking out about it. I love your voice though. Can I ask you to swear next Monday? Because I feel the AI-ness comes because your voice and speech are perfect. Well, I'm definitely not an AI. I'm definitely a real girl, but I can say a few curse words. I do feel like I curse quite a bit on this show. I think I've already said a curse word and we're only in the refractions, but I will definitely keep cursing for you, dear friend. But I will say a couple things on this. One is that I do use the video editing software that everybody uses, and it cuts speech gaps when I hesitate for a long time or I spend more than a second or two not speaking as you do when you're thinking about what to say and as you're speaking with intention. And because of that software and the way that it cuts things up, I think it actually kind of makes you seem more like an AI. I notice so many creators are doing this, like way more creators are doing this than aren't doing this. So definitely I try to record these videos when I am present, rolling, fully in my Mercury, fully in my Mars, like, got words coming out of my mouth. But more often than not, I'm actually recording in the morning. I'm actually drinking coffee. And so my words are kind of slow. And so we use that software, and that can be part of why it sounds like AI. Another thing is that I have pretty extensive media training. I worked for a long time in media and podcasting and journalism before this. So I feel like sometimes I hear myself slip into a broadcast voice. Some people call this like the customer service voice. For me, it's more of a broadcast voice. And I kind of can't help it, but I am working on it. So stick with me. I'll try to slip in some fucking curse words for you just so you can know I'm not an AI, but I think AI knows the curse words too, right? All right, let's get into our transits for the week. Here they are. Today, Monday, August 25th, Venus enters Leo and immediately forms up a trine with Saturn retrograding through early Aries and Neptune retrograding through early Aries. Venus also moves into opposition, though that won't be exact for a couple days, but she moves into opposition with Pluto in Aquarius. And the moon, for her part, moves from late Virgo through Libra, where Mars is, then through Mars ruled Scorpio, which is the sign of her fall, all the way into Sagittarius. Now, this week is a really cool and interesting one to be looking at the astrology because all of the outer planets are involved in a song of support for one another. So, Venus is sextiling Uranus, and Uranus is sextiling Saturn and Neptune. And Saturn and Neptune are trining Venus. This is called a minor trine formation. We also have one on the other side of the dial with Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus. So we really have all of these outer planets kind of supporting one another in different but meaningful ways. Now, the moon is going to be forming up some interesting little aspects with all of these planets and sort of weaving and embroidering this story together as she travels from Virgo to Sagittarius. Now, however you think of the outer planets, there is something really significant happening here. I hear people call the outer planets generational planets or transpersonal planets. I know in the modern and evolutionary traditions, they think of the planets as being higher octaves of some of the inner planets. I don't know about any of that, but I have seen that the outer planets are deeply, deeply impactful, potent. Some of the most powerful transits that we go through in our lives come from these outer planet transits. So the fact that all of the outer planets are supporting one another is not something that we should take lightly this week. This is a very collaborative arrangement. So we might look at this week and we might go, oh no, Venus Pluto opposition. But actually, I think the story of what's happening here is a little more complex than that. Plus, I'm biased, but as I said in the intro, Venus and Pluto contacts make some of the best art in the world. We'll look at that in a minute. I want to talk for a minute about what Pluto is doing in Aquarius. So, in my mind, especially in moments like this where stuff is actively moving through Leo and opposing it, we had Mercury come through, retrograde back. Now Mercury's moving through again. We have Venus now coming in. And across the dial in Aquarius, Pluto is really like a Greek chorus of voices chanting in the back of our head. It is the voice of the collective that is sort of underscoring what's happening to us. And I feel like this Plutonian voice in Aquarius has quite a spectrum to it. Now, on one side, this Plutonian Greek chorus of voices is saying things like eat the rich, or it's provoking the kind of action that is inspiring companies to take their CEOs' pictures off their websites. And on the other end of the spectrum, it can also be saying things like, don't use that kind of language or you're not one of us. Now, there's a lot of other stuff going on this spectrum. I made it sound like a binary, but it's not really like that. It's just to say that the collective has these voices that can be really, really intoxicating. They can also be really damaging, and it can show up in 100 different ways. So even if you're thinking, oh, I'm on the right side of history, I'm immune, probably not. Now, this is related by opposition to what's happening in Leo. So when planets come through Leo, they are strengthening that solar heart of us. They are strengthening the individual, they are strengthening the solar figure, they are strengthening our courage and our vitality and our desire to live our own fated path. So think about that tension here. We have the Greek chorus that's sort of compelling us with social and collective pressure, maybe compelling us to think bigger than ourselves, maybe compelling us to tamp ourselves down to fit into the collective. Now, either can be productive, either can be damaging. I'm not really making an advocacy case for any way that that voice should sound, but it's something important that's underscoring everything that goes on here in Leo. And it will become even more important as eclipses start happening in Leo and Aquarius next spring, only a few months from now. Here's how Venus moving into Leo has me thinking. Venus in Leo is glorious. She is sun-soaked. She is radiant. She is resplendent in the mantle of the sun. And the sun has pretty good dignity this week because it is being hosted by Mercury, and Mercury is being hosted by the sun. So as Venus really steps through into the realm of the sun, I feel like she is an exalted kind of outsider, specifically because of this trine from Saturn and Neptune in Aries. And Saturn in Aries can really be the voice of exile, or the voice of the outsider, or the tribal narrative. Now, because all these outer planets are all working together, I think Pluto is less harsh on Venus here than it otherwise would be. It's actually a little more collaborative. And what it feels like is a courageous figure who's able to kind of step out of and break out of the clawing hands of the collective that might keep them inside the Overton window of what's acceptable. And here we have this Venusian figure that's stepping out and saying, I'm okay with being an outsider because I need to shine in the way that I was born to shine. There are so many examples of this, but I think the first that came to mind was Josephine Baker, who arrived in Paris in the 1920s, and as a Black American woman, she really stepped into her role as an outsider. She stepped into this world where people really didn't know what to do with her, and instead of letting that shrink her back and sort of tamp her down like that Greek chorus of voices of Pluto and Aquarius might sometimes compel us to do, she really leaned into that role. She ended up dancing nearly naked on stage with her pet cheetah. And the people of Paris really idolized and idealized her. And they were totally captivated by her seemingly otherworldly eroticism. Now, there are talented biographers for Josephine Baker who write eloquently about the reality and the problematic conditions and the sort of objectification that occurred there, but that's a little outside the scope of this video. What I'm saying is that her aura of being different is part of what made her a star, and that's undeniably true. And I think what's really interesting about Josephine Baker is that later, once her legacy had really cemented her as a star in this regard, she actually turned that outsider insider dynamism into working as a spy during the war. She has a super fascinating legacy. I highly recommend checking out more about Josephine Baker. But that's the kind of idealized and selfhood drenched Venus that we're talking about emerging here in Leo with all of this outer planetary synergy. It really is like all of the planets are conspiring together to empower this figure, sort of in like a dark way, but also in a way that is drenched in light, if that makes any sense. Another example I love to trot out is David Bowie's chart. Now, Bowie has a lot in his chart that plays with the tension between Aquarius and Leo. He actually has chart ruler Saturn conjunct Pluto and his Leo moon. So Bowie, I think, is also a great example of someone who was sort of this outside figure. And talk about an Aquarian alien, which we talked about on last week's show. He never even tried to pretend that he was part of the overculture. He was always standing outside that, always playing with that. And that's why we love him to this day. Let me know in the comments who you think of when you think exalted outsider, who we appreciate and love and admire for being an absolute freak of nature or for being sort of unflinchingly aligned with themselves in a way that is admirable to witness, but maybe behind the scenes difficult for them to bear or has some cost to it. I had so many coming to mind. I had to cut some from the script. So I'll leave some of mine in the comments below too. So that's something I want you guys to think a lot about this week, because basically every year for the next 18 years, as Pluto slides through Aquarius, anything moving through Leo, whether that's eclipses, whether it's a slow moving planet next year like Jupiter, whether it is Saturn, which is coming down the pipeline, or if it is some fast moving planet like Venus or Mercury, it's all in conversation with that Pluto and really that Greek chorus of the collective. The last piece I want to show you is this piece from Marina Abramovic, legendary performance artist. Almost a cliche for an art school girly like me to be showing you some Marina, but here we are. It's Marina and her longtime partner and fellow performance artist Ule, and it is called Rest Energy from 1980. This is the image that always comes into my mind for the Venus Pluto opposition phase. Now, this is a performance where Ule and Marina actually had a loaded bow and arrow pointed directly at her heart, and Ule just is leaning back and letting gravity become a threat, essentially. They were both mic'd up and they had their heartbeats kind of echoing throughout the gallery. I think she lasted just over 4 minutes. It was an actually terrifying experience for her because the stakes were lethal, but it was all about trust and love and control and power, and of course, implicating the audience as many of her performances do. I think if this Venus Pluto opposition looked a little different and didn't have as much support from the outer planets as it does, we could go into some of Marina's other works. Like a Venus Pluto opposition can also be rhythm zero. If you know, you know. But we're really not in that territory here. It just doesn't feel like that. It actually feels like something more empowering. But I wanted to show you guys this image because this is how I always think of the opposition between these two planets. Don't forget that Venus is one of the most astronomically terrifying planets that we can imagine. The surface of Venus is one of the least hospitable places I've ever seen. It is literally covered in volcanoes that are raging and seething and pouring out magma all day, every day. And it's funny when we think about Mars as the red planet and then we see pictures of Mars and we're like, is it really that red? Because it doesn't look all that red. And then we see kind of those pictures of Venus and it's like, kind of looks like Venus is the raging, angry red planet. Now, there's something really volcanic typically associated with Pluto too. So I think Venus and Pluto actually have a lot more in common than people really give them credit for. And when they come together, they can form some of the most beautiful art. Most of the art that I love in this world, when I look up the artist's natal chart, they have some really strong contact between Venus and Pluto. So let me know your favorite artist in the comments, whether it's an actor, writer, a director, a musician. Let me know who they are. I will tell you if Venus and Pluto have an aspect in their chart because I think it's fun. All right, we've reached the part of the show where we talk about how I, as a pagan, animist, human being, astrologer lady, am going to be using the astrology of this week. So I love Venus. Venus is my sect benefic, and I've learned so much from her last year in my Venus perfected year. This also is triggering a dynamic in my natal chart. So I have Venus in Leo along with Mars and Jupiter opposing my natal Saturn in early Aquarius. So this is really personal astrology. I'm going to be taking good notes this week. I've been journaling way more than usual, even if it's just a line a day, because I know I'm going to come back to this time and try to understand what the hell's going on with me and what was going down. One of my favorite remediations and ways to strengthen my Venus when I'm feeling the need for it is to douse myself in rose water. So I will be doing that. I'm telling you, the day that I switched over into a Mars perfection year, this started going on my skin when I started putting it on because my face is just hot and I'm just raging all the time in this Mars year, and not always in a bad way. But so I'll probably be using a lot of my rose water to connect with Venus. And honestly, I've been talking with Sarah a lot about Venus and strengthening Venus in my chart because she is really one of my strongest and happiest planets. So I'm going to be trying to do some Venusian stuff this week. I'm going to go to the museum. I'm going to do some art. I'm going to pick out one of my 700 black t-shirts and style it in a new and inventive way. Can it be done? We'll find out. But I think the most impactful and important work that I'm going to do this week is be digging into my Aquarius second house, where my chart ruler Saturn is, and trying to suss out what that Greek chorus is telling me. I don't feel the need to resolve it or to fight it, but I want to know what that voice is. And I want to be able to differentiate that voice from myself a little more constructively. So I feel like Venus is going to be helping me in that. All right, gorgeous people, you know what that sound means. It means my coffee is done. And so the show must be done. I hope you guys all have a lovely, incredible week with sun drenched Venus. I hope it is sweeter and easier than the weeks have been recently. There's been some turbulence for sure, and we're not even into the eclipse window yet. So expect to hear more about that next week as well. Don't forget, if you're like, what does this all mean for me? Or I want to figure out how this works in my natal chart, I am running that mentorship program with Sarah Posh. We have very limited spots, and not in the false scarcity way, just in the way where we are two people trying to run a really small group of weirdos looking over their natal charts, and things are pretty hands on. So hit the link in the description if you're interested in that. Have an incredible week. I will see you guys next Monday.